Whenever you hear about mobile teamfight tactics, everyone always complains that there are a lot of glitches, bugs, and that Riot Games is dumbing down the game to accommodate mobile players. Whenever one of your friends downloads the app on their phone, you're probably telling them, you know, if you want to get a lot better, you should probably just play on your computer, because you can do things a lot faster, you have your mouse and your keyboard, and things like scouting is a lot easier. However, I heard a rumor that the rank 1 player in North America right now is playing from his phone.
Bro, I swear for no
You're lower
reason.
ranked than a mobile-only player, Kian. How does that make you feel?
This guy? TFT?
Yeah, he only plays mobile.
Bro.
Apparently it came from Riot Mord's stream, and so I just reached out to Mort on Twitter. Is it actually true that Yukong, who is the rank 1 player in North America right now, actually a mobile player? And Mort just responded with his Twitch link, so I went ahead and checked that out. As we can see here, this guy is clearly playing on his iPad. And yeah, this is us on full screen on his Twitch channel. We can see the recordings and the battery level on the top right, and we can see the date information on the top left, and again, his iPad screen is not even taking up the full screen on Twitch. How he does it? Well, let's find out. What's most interesting to me is that Yukong was an unknown player before set 3.5. I saw him on the leaderboards a couple of times in the top 100 in the first 2 weeks of the set, but I didn't really put too much thought to it because the highest ranked players in the beginning of a set are typically just the people who play the most. However, I checked this guy out and he kept his LP all the way up, and he is now 1300 LP in Challenger. And he was Platinum in set 1, didn't play in set 2, and was Masters in set 3. So let's check out how he does it and what he's doing differently than other players. Not surprisingly, based on his match history, he really only plays Jinx and Cybernetics. Coincidentally, on my meta snapshot, those are the 3 comps that I had in S tier: Rebels, Cybernetics, and Blaster Brawler. So what is he doing differently than other players that allows him to really excel and hit rank 1? Well, first of all, he's probably playing the compositions that are the best. We all know that Jinx is super broken right now, and I've been in a game where 6 other players all went for Jinx. So how does he get rank 1 from his phone? Well, let's think about it for a moment. On your phone, it's much harder to scout, it's much harder to roll, and it's much harder to quickly position your team at the last few seconds before a fight. So what units would be great to counteract this? Well, one unit that pops to my mind is playing a lot of Aurelion Sol. Aurelion Sol is immune to Blitzcrank hooks and Zephyr, so you could just put Aurelion Sol in a corner and that blocks a lot of positioning gimmicks from the enemy team. So what could we guess? This guy is playing Rebels. So we go onto his page here, we see that he has 16 games on Jinx and then 4 games on Cybernetics. But let's go a little deeper and see what he's doing differently than other players right now. So taking a look at his match history, obviously we're gonna see a lot of Jinx, and we'll notice that he goes triple offensive items on Jinx every single game. I actually do not see a single defensive item on his Jinx in his entire match history. While this is pretty common already at the highest level of play, I still do see some players putting defensive items on their Jinx, but we'll notice that this guy goes for triple offensive. Next up, we'll notice that he's playing a lot of Rebels. The typical Rebel build that we're used to is by going to level 8 or 9 and playing 6 Rebels, an extra Blaster, and Gangplank. However, when we look at his whole team and his whole match history here, I do not see a single Gangplank. I looked through his past 30 to 40 games and I did not see him play it once. And I know that Gangplank needs Guardian Angel, but we'll notice in some of his games he does manage to hit a Guardian Angel, but I do not see a Gangplank anywhere. So he's thinking that Gangplank is too expensive for this composition and you just want to focus your team around Jinx carry, and then he actually adds on Fizz, Echo, and Aurelion Sol as his late game. The logic behind this is that I know that Rebel Fizz is super strong right now, and Fizz works great because he gets the Infiltrator buff from Zed. Echo is just super strong right now, and that champion counters a lot of the attack damage carries that we're facing in most of our games. Coincidentally, Fizz is really good at countering other Jinx players because he is both an Infiltrator that jumps to the back line, and he has an area of effect crowd control ability that most likely hits the enemy carry. And what did we learn from before? No one's building defensive items on their Jinx, so Fizz is going to get a free large ultimate off on the backline every single time. So now let's see how he does it. You'll see here that early game he uses Zed as his item holder, and he notes that down here that Zed is by far the best item holder for Jinx. Another tip we see was something we already mentioned before, where he says Brawler Jinx loses to Echo 2, and again, he's going to be using Echo as one of his big late game bombs in order to counter a lot of the attack speed oriented carries in the late game. Another thing he mentions is that 6 Rebels is much better than 4 Brawlers with Jinx. Typically, this is a review already held by a lot of the top players because Rebels are always going to be the strongest late game composition because you could run a lot of super strong legendaries. Whereas Brawlers, they kind of fall off because they just have a ton of health, and the units themselves, apart from Gnar, and Vi aren't very strong in the late game. Next, the best items he thinks are for Jinx are Giant Slayer, Last Whisper, and Deathblade if there are mechs and brawlers in your game. If not, go for the classic Last Whisper, Infinity Edge, Deathblade build that we've all been using already. He loves going for BF swords on all his carousels because he says that Jinx can use up to 4 sword items. He typically dislikes bow starts, as we don't often see items such as Runons or Rapid Fire Cannon. The most common item we've seen is actually the Deathblade and Last Whisper. Next up, for late game, we already covered this already, but he says Fizz and Echo late game belong in any comp, as a 2-unit combo works super well because individually the units are super strong. Again, Fizz has an AoE knockup and Echo slows the attack speed of the entire enemy team. One of the reasons why he's so successful with this build so far is because BF Sword is hardly contested and he thinks that that's the best item for Jinx in this current metagame. Next up, you're probably wondering when you want to start keeping Rebels on your bench. Typically, Yukong only holds them if it doesn't cost Econ, and he only holds them at 1 star. Next, he'll never hold Master Yi if it costs him Econ, and he always pre-levels on stage 2-4. This was something we learned in a previous video from Polt where he started introducing that tactic into all of his games. During the game, if Rebels are too contested, he goes for Vayne 2 instead, or early Echo if he happens to hit it. If he hits the Vayne, he'll go ahead and transition into Cybernetics. Next up, he again goes over why he hates Gangplank so much. He says, "It's really bad, you spend so much gold and you can't go level 9 if you go for the Gangplank. You'll need upgrades and items on GP. I think he'd much rather play a Fizz or an Echo which only needs 1 or 2 items instead of 3 like Gangplank in order to get a very good effect. For example, Gangplank, he still works with 2 items, but he's not super broken until he gets 3, whereas Echo and Fizz, they're very usable with very minimal resources. Apart from that, playing Rebels is the same as it's always been. It's pretty much you go for a fast 8, roll it down, try to get some Jinxes, try to get all the other Rebels, maybe hit an Aurelion Soul, and try to stabilize and then go 9 and then keep playing from there. However, sometimes if he is too weak on stage 4-1, he'll go ahead and roll on level 7 in order to just try to top 4 instead of trying to win the game. As we see here, he picks up a lot of 4-cost units, picks up the Brawlers, and of course picks up Jinxes whenever he sees them. He'll hold on to level 1 Rebels as he's discussed before, but he won't go, for example, for the second Master Yi as we saw in this roll down. Typically, he'll go for level 8 at 4-3 and roll it down there instead. But again, since he was low health this game, he went ahead and rolled down on level 7 just to try to top 4. So one thing we notice about his play is that early game is everything, because winning the early game means you could safely go to level 8 and eventually stabilize there in order to either econ up again to roll down for all the legendary units or go to 9 and roll there. So one thing that he notes, and if you guys have been to the channel before, you guys already know this, Ionic Spark is super broken right now and it's one of the strongest early game items, and he seems to agree with that sentiment. So if you ever get a Negatron and a Rod early, go ahead and build Ionic Spark on this patch because again, it's going to be winning a lot of your early games, as it just deals a ton of damage and the components aren't really that useful in the rest of the composition. If you didn't know this yet, you might be new to the channel. If you are, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below and ring the notification bell in order to get notified about my new videos. Now that we know how he plays the comp, let's get into some of the limitations he has as a mobile player. So first off, he mentions that there's some mechanics that you can't really do. However, even though he got rank 1, he hasn't played in set 3, and there was an interesting change during set 3 where you couldn't sell units during the carousel, and he actually thought that other people on desktop could do this, but they patched out that you cannot sell during the carousel, which you used to be able to do, and this is just some knowledge that he wasn't even aware of, and it just goes to show that you don't need to know every single little detail to be good at TFT. You guys have seen a lot of my stuff before, and you guys know that I always say that about 80 to 90% of the game is all about knowing when to roll and when to level. And that's no surprise here because he shows that he's able to execute pretty much everything as strong as possible and use his game knowledge to play all the good comps in the game, and he leverages that in order to beat out every other player. The next disadvantage he has is that he says he often plays while on the bus, and he does say that he gets disconnected a lot. So if you are playing on mobile, if you're not sitting at home, if you don't have strong internet, it's gonna be a struggle because you're gonna lose a lot of games because you got disconnected. And I highly suggest, if you are trying to get to as high a rank as possible, only play when you have a stable internet connection. Next up, you can often fat finger things when playing on your tablet or your phone. The screen is smaller and your fingers can always slip up, and he actually said that he's accidentally sold Jinx 2 a bunch of times before. There are many other limitations to mobile. For example, I asked him how he scouts and how often he scouts, but he doesn't really scout early game because it's often too tedious to click through everything during the early rounds, so he only really scouts towards the late game. So that's why he only goes for one comp. He doesn't really look around, and this works great for his playstyle. And again, he executes this so much better than every other player out there right now. So what do you guys think about this mobile player? I know that he hasn't been in Challenger before, as he was Masters in set 3 and Platinum in set 1, but we can't ignore how strong of a player he is right now. And what do you guys think? Do you guys think that this player is a fluke because Rebels are so good in this patch and he's a really good Rebel player? Do you guys think that things like speed and mechanics don't really matter as much as you thought it did before, and pretty much all that matters in this game is game knowledge? Let me know what you guys think about that in the comments below. And if you guys enjoyed this video, feel free to hit the like button, feel free to share this with your friends, and as always, good luck in your next games this week, and I'll see you guys next time. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to share and subscribe, and of course smash that like button. Each like is an LP I gain before the next video.